Hey friends, welcome back to History Savvy. Today, as you can see by who I've got on screen here, I've got the Fat Electrician with his video called Wrecking and Trolling the Germans with a Wooden Plane, the de Havilland 98 Mosquito. So, this will have been the third video from the Fat Electrician that I've reviewed or reacted to, and I've gotten comments on those two previous videos from people who are essentially offended on behalf of the Fat Electrician. People who are saying you interrupt him too much, you're critical of him, things like that. And to those people, I would say, look, anytime you do something in history, you create some kind of historical content, whether that be a book or a YouTube video or whatever, you're opening yourself up to comment and critique. And that goes for the professional historians as well as the YouTube amateur historians. In fact, in professional history, professional historians critique and comment on each other's works all the time. It's an essential part of the craft. So if you're really a big fan of the Fat Electrician and you're easily offended, this video is probably not going to be for you. You're going to want to click away. So also, I want it to be known that I'm not trying to go after the Fat Electrician here. Yes, I have professional historical training. I'm getting my master's in history, but I have no beef with the Fat Electrician. I just think there's always more to be said on a historical topic. And so what I hope to do is maybe provide a little more information on this video, on this topic. So with that said, I hope you'll stick around and let's get into it.
In 1941, the British government finally and reluctantly agreed to let a speed freak build their next warplane, and this man took two 1,600 horsepower engines, stuck them inside of a wooden airplane, and things immediately got out of hand in the best way possible.
The good hook.
Today we're talking about the DH-98 de Havilland Mosquito.
It's a good looking plane. And for those of you, I mean, immediately I'm thinking of like the American P-38 Lightning. Just with the twin engines, you've got the single cockpit. I think in terms of style, I would prefer the P-38, but I mean, it was the Mosquito was a lot faster than the P-38. But yeah, just a point of interest, point of note here. Cheeky smile.
And while the official nickname is the Mosquito, it also goes by the Mossy, the Loping Lumberyard, the Wooden Wonder, and the Timber of Terror. And when something has that many different nicknames, you know it's going to be good. And just like so many other stories, this story too begins with a word from our sponsor, because this video is brought to you by my favorite sporting goods store, Shields. They've got a bunch of really cool retail locations all across the United States and an even better online store where you can get pretty much anything that has anything to do with going outside or being physically active. Or beef jerky. They have a bunch of beef jerky too. Anyways, if you use the link on my website or in the description down below, you're going to get free shipping on your order. Let's get back to this video. Our story begins in 1909 with Sir Geoffrey de Havilland. He is 27 years old, he just got married, and he has spent his entire life working on, building, and designing cars and motorcycles. But now, they're just not fast enough. There's this new thing out, airplanes, and they can go even faster. So naturally, he's got to get him one of those. The only problem is, building a plane, as I'm sure you can imagine, costs a lot of money, even back then when they were just biplanes. So where's he going to get all this money? Well, he's going to do exactly what any self-respecting man would do. He's going to go to grandma for a 0% interest loan. And when I say a 0% interest loan, I mean he goes to his grandmother and asks for a, and I quote, advance on his inheritance. Straight up, Grandma, you need to fucking die or front me the money because I'm trying to make history over here. So Grandma, being the gangster that she is, decides that she's going to give little Geoffrey £1,000 for his airplane project. Now, full stop. £1,000, you're like, oh, $1,000, that's a lot of money. No, this is 1909. £1,000 back then is equivalent to like almost $200,000 American, okay? Like Grandma is apparently loaded. So he gets all this money and he begins designing and making his own airplane. And after 2 long years,
so a small point of correction here, and it's really not material to the overarching story, but it was not his grandma that gave him the money, but his grandpa. It was his maternal grandfather that he got the money from. So remember, this is 1909 England. Women just didn't have all kinds of control over family finances. But also, I find interesting the connection between de Havilland and the Wright brothers. There's I think you could say it's a direct connection. So in 1908, the Wright brothers sent over one of their Wright flyers for an exhibition, and Wilbur Wright himself went over and got it all ready to go, and then flew it around on exhibitions. And so Geoffrey de Havilland, being the wealthy English boy that he was with lots of uh, free time, went over to France and saw Wilbur Wright fly the Wright Flyer, and that was the thing that inspired him to get into aviation. And so his next step was to build his own aircraft, and as we heard, he got the money from his grandpa.
The day finally comes that his airplane is finished and it's finally ready for its first flight. So he hops in, takes his plane up into the sky, and everything goes absolutely perfect right until he crashed it. The plane is completely destroyed, and like every other speed freak and race car driver I've ever met in my entire life, de Havilland just crawls out of the wreckage and was like, "That's fun, let's do that again." He then proceeds to make his very own aircraft manufacturing company. Fast forward.
So, I mean, at this point, de Havilland, he had never taken flying lessons. That's probably not surprising. He was teaching himself how to fly as he was building these airplanes. And that first crash would not be his last crash.
A couple of decades, de Havilland owns a very successful airplane company, and it's the early 1930s, and everybody is beginning to make their planes out of metal, but de Havilland isn't having it because he thinks that making planes out of metal is dumb. Obviously, I'm paraphrasing here, but he's basically like, metal weighs more than wood, which means that my plane is going to be slower by making it out of metal. Why on earth would I do that? To which the entire aviation community basically yells at the guy like, well, metal is stronger than wood, duh, and he's like, fucking, it's an airplane. What? Just don't run it into shit. It'll be fine. If you want strong, go build a tank. What are we even talking about here? Have you ever seen a fucking squirrel with knight's armor on? No, it doesn't make any fucking sense. So de Havilland's like, fine, I'm just gonna have to prove it to these people. 1934.
So the 1930s were a time of transition in aircraft. You were going from the wood and cloth construction of earlier decades into metal. And the reason for metal is your aircraft are becoming bigger and they're becoming more complicated. And so you need a structural integrity, structural strength to better handle these complicated and heavy parts of the aircraft. Not only is the aircraft more complicated in itself, people are pushing the aircraft to its physical limits. And wood is going to be metals is able to handle more stress than wood at this time. I mean, even now we still use metal aircraft. So there still was a place for wood in smaller aircraft for smaller uses. You know, if you were doing exhibitions, you were giving people plane rides at things like county fairs, you could have a wooden and cloth aircraft and be just fine. But if you're trying to operate an airline, you're going to want a stronger aircraft that's going to take the stresses of flying thousands of hours a year. And so again, we're in this transition point, and we're also at a glory point of aircraft racing. And
planes out of metal, but de Havilland isn't having it because he thinks that making planes out of metal is dumb. Obviously, I'm paraphrasing here, but he's basically like, metal weighs more than wood, which means that my plane is going to be slower by making it out of metal. Why on earth would I do that? To which the entire aviation community basically yells at the guy like, well, metal is stronger than wood, duh, and he's like, fucking, it's an airplane. What? Just don't run it into shit. It'll be fine. If you want strong, go build a tank. What are we even talking about here? Have you ever seen a fucking squirrel with knight's armor on? No, it doesn't make any fucking sense. So de Havilland's like, fine, I'm just gonna have.
So, the 1930s are a period of transition from the cloth and wood of the earlier decades into metal. And there's a good reason for going into metal aircraft. As pilots are pushing aircraft to their limits, you need an aircraft to be built strongly. It needs to be structurally sound, and metal is the way to go with that. De Havilland is also building sport planes, racing planes, and those planes need to go fast. And so, yes, wood was an attractive option for that because you could fly. You're flying straight. You know, you weren't necessarily doing these steep dives and things like that. You're just trying to get from A to B as fast as possible. So wood was a good application for that. But for broader commercial applications or military applications, you would need metal for your aircraft.
have to prove it to
That
these
was
people.
what the thinking was at the time.
1934, they're going to have the McRobertson Air Race. It's 11,200 miles from England to Melbourne, Australia. You have to fly all the way there. You can take any route you want. You can stop to refuel as many times as you want. There's this huge cash prize of 15,000 pounds. All the fastest airplanes on the planet are going to show up and try to win this race. So de Havilland creates a DH-98 Comet, ends up being the fastest plane in the world at this point in time, and obviously wins this race. And obviously, nobody cares because it's made out of wood, and they said that that's dumb. So nobody's going to learn anything from the point he just proved. Fast forward 19...
But again, de Havilland designed this plane to win races. It was a purpose-built airplane in the same way that NASCAR cars are built to win those races. They're not built for going to town cars.
1936, post-World War I, Germany is starting to rearm their entire country. Britain takes note, and they're like, wow, we should build up some weapons too in case they try something. So they put out a bid. They let all the aircraft manufacturers know that they're looking for a twin-engine medium bomber that's capable of carrying 3,000 pounds and cruising at a speed of 300 miles an hour. So there's money to be made with the government contract. All the airplane manufacturers flock to it and start putting in their bids and their designs for their planes. And pretty much all of them follow the conventional knowledge of how to build a bomber at this point in time, which was to have a humongous, powerful airplane made out of metal and absolutely covered in machine guns everywhere, because you need to be able to fire in all directions to fight off all the fighter planes that are going to try to shoot you down. And absolutely everybody follows that basic outline except for de Havilland. He decides that he's going to build a plane using a completely different ideology from everybody else. Instead of having a plane that's going to have armor and machine guns and be able to win a firefight in the air against other fighter planes, he's just going to avoid the firefight altogether. Because at the end of the day, the bomber's job isn't to shoot down fighter airplanes, it's to deliver the bomb. He's going to get rid of all the armor, all the machine guns, all the defensive countermeasures that other bombers have, and use all of his efforts to try to get this plane as fast as possible to just be able to outrun the firefight. Because you know what's better than getting shot at and having body armor on? Not getting shot at. Realizing that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, he's going to make this plane as fast as possible. And to do...
And that's true. Now, the idea of a bomber that would just fly so fast, drop the bomb, and fly out of there was not, I mean, it was certainly a novel idea, but it wasn't unique to de Havilland or even the Brits. The Germans also had this concept they called the Schnellbomber, the fast or quick bomber. And they never really, well, they certainly didn't take it as seriously as de Havilland took the Mosquito. But in my estimation, I would argue that the concept of the Schnellbomber did really shape the bombers that Germany did build, like the Heinkels. Nobody in the German Luftwaffe was willing to fully give up defensive machine guns on board these aircraft. So the German bombers were kind of a mix between the Schnellbomber idea of just get in, drop the bombs, and get out, and the more classical big bomber with defensive armaments.
Do that, he's going to make it out of wood again. So he builds his wooden bomber. He then proceeds to take the most powerful aircraft engine on the planet, the Merlin, and sticks two of them inside of this thing. And this aircraft is the fastest warplane on the planet. With a cruising speed of 325 miles an hour and a max speed of almost 400 miles an hour, this thing is absolutely untouchable, and that's not even the impressive part. It's the manufacturing process where de Havilland's idea stands head and shoulders above the competition. You have to remember, they're going into World War II. Plastic wasn't widely used yet, and anything that's plastic today was probably metal back then. Metal was used for absolutely everything from canteens to tanks to airplanes. All of it was metal, meaning that throughout the course of World War II, metal became extremely scarce, so much so that America was trying to build ships out of concrete, and Great Britain was trying to build an aircraft carrier out of wood pulp and ice. So being able to build a...
The wood pulp and ice ship is a good video for another, or is a good topic for another video. But before we move too far ahead, I want to talk about the choice of the Merlin engines. Now, Britain during the war really focused on sort of rationalizing the war industry. So they said, look, we're going to have a small selection of engines that people can pick from, manufacturers can pick from, because we don't want a ton of special parts or special engines. We want to be able to take an engine from aircraft A and put it in aircraft B, or get this part from manufacturer A and be able to put it on an engine built by manufacturer B. And de Havilland's choice of the Merlin engines was because there was a bright future for the Merlin engines. there was good chances that it was going to be upgraded, and it was. And so that offered him the power he was looking for. And it wasn't just the engines that the powerful engines that de Havilland wanted. He also put the biggest propellers he could on the thing. I mean, the propellers barely uh, didn't. Well, the propellers almost hit the fuselage. That's how big they were. So during the war, again, Britain was really trying to rationalize the war industry and the engines and equipment that was available. And of course, wood was unique. Yeah, I'll leave him to make the point about wood was a natural benefit because metal was scarce.
Bomber out of a cheap and readily available resource like wood was a humongous deal. And it all trickles down from there because not only are you just using an untapped resource, by using wood, that means that you're not going to have metal workers and riveters working on the plane. You're going to have woodworkers working on your plane, which at this point in time was a pretty much untapped labor pool that was still doing other stuff like building cabinets and pianos. They had no real way to contribute to the war effort, except now they do. And the list of benefits keeps going. I feel like I'm in an infomercial.
But I'm not done yet.
Because the Mosquito's
Billy
plan
Mays.
is not to fight firefights in the air, but to simply outrun them, you know what the Mosquito doesn't need? Machine guns. You know what you don't need if you don't have machine guns? Ammunition. And you know what you also don't need if you don't have machine guns? People to fire the machine guns. So you're also saving guns, ammunition, and personnel because the Mosquito only has 2 crew members. And you know what all those things do? They add weight to the aircraft, like over 1,000 pounds, meaning that now that all that's gone, the Mosquito can now carry an extra 1,000 pounds worth of bombs to drop on the enemy, which is actually what a bomber's job is. So just to recap, de Havilland has now delivered a bomber to the British government that is made out of a readily available resource with a brand new untapped labor pool that is cheaper in pretty much every way, and it delivers more bombs faster to the enemy. So clearly, the British government fucking hates it. And I mean, really, Sir Geoffrey de Havilland really should be more considerate. How are these poor politicians and defense contractors going to be able to feed their kids if he's out here trying to make planes that are cheap and reliable? I mean, what's the point of even going to war if you're not going to make a bunch of money off of it, right?
That's a pretty bold claim. I mean, essentially, what I think he's saying there is that the British politicians were nothing but war profiteers, and de Havilland was really the only one serious about winning the war. That's a bold claim. I don't think he really believes. At least, I mean, it's just insane.
I guess I'm just glad it's not a uniquely American thing for this to happen. So all the other aircraft manufacturers are talking smack about de Havilland's idea. They're saying that it's basically a giant model airplane and that wood is not a suitable building material for a respectable plane and all this other stuff that they're desperately trying to come up with so that he doesn't win the bid. And that's when Lord Teeny Mittens, Beaverbrook over here chimes in. He's the Minister of Aircraft Production for all of Britain and he just shuts the project down. I'm assuming it's because a giant model airplane would make his hands look even tinier.
I've got these tiny hands, and that's gonna make them look even tinier.
In fact, the only person that even liked the idea of the Mosquito was the Air Marshal for the RAF, Sir Wilfrid Freeman, who also, by sheer coincidence, is the only man in this conversation that has flown planes in combat and presumably knows what he's actually talking about and doesn't have a vested financial interest in the outcome. Freeman is also responsible.
That's again, in fairness to Beaverbrook. So in after Dunkirk happened and everybody was pulled back to Britain, Britain was super focused on defending their island. And so Beaverbrook, who was in charge of material, I can't remember his official title, he's some minister of war production or material or something. He basically said, look, we need to focus on building things, building defense pieces that are actually tried and true. And the Mosquito is not one of them. So we're not going to worry about that right now. Get it off the table. There was also concern of wood. Is there enough wood to actually make the Mosquito, or can we use the wood to make other things like buttstocks for guns and things like that? And it wasn't until those concerns were resolved that a tip of the hat was given to de Havilland. Okay, go ahead and finish making this prototype. So basically, in Beaverbrook's defense, after Dunkirk, everybody was super concerned about defending Britain, and they were going to focus on building defense materials that were tried and true.
responsible for the RAF ordering the Spitfire, the Hurricane, and the Lancaster bomber, as well as the development of the Merlin engine. Like, he's got a pretty good track record of picking amazing planes. So obviously we're gonna listen to what Sir Wilfrid Freeman has to say, right? Wrong. 100% wrong. What we're gonna do is we're gonna have Lord Bitchmittens over here, fire him, transfer him to a different department, and then take credit for all of his accomplishments and use that newfound status to kill the Mosquito project once and for all. Because politics. And that's pretty much it. 1937.
So, yes, it's true that Beaverbrook did tend to take credit for things that he probably shouldn't have taken credit from. And really, his biggest contribution to the war effort was removing bottlenecks. That was his big thing. He wanted to cut through the red tape just to get the job done. Why are we fighting here? Let's just get the job done, work together, and if I have to be the bad guy, then I will. And that was Beaverbrook. Also, he was appointed by Winston Churchill. They were friends. They fought, but they were friends. And he wasn't the Minister of War Material or whatever his official office was for the entire war. Last couple years, it was somebody else.
The British government told de Havilland, kick rocks, we're not interested. We're going to move on with our life. Fast forward, 1940, World War II has in fact kicked off, and it is not looking that great for the British because we are right in the middle of the Battle of Britain. Okay, if you don't know, the Battle of Britain, also known as the Air Battle for England, was basically the Germans were bombing Britain every day for about 3 months straight. Britain was obviously sending up their air force to fight back. Both sides lost thousands of people and thousands of airplanes. Okay, if you're not picking up what I'm putting down, I'm trying to tell you the RAF is now short a bunch of planes and a bunch of pilots, and there's really no way of replenishing the amount of planes because metal is extremely scarce, as well as the manpower to make the planes anyways. If only there was some type of plane that they could make out of an alternative material to metal that had a completely different labor force to build it. Oh wait, we've had that literally the entire time, we just didn't want to use it because of politics. Perfect. So the British government finally reluctantly orders 50 of them. So de Havilland gets to work right away, builds all these planes, turns them over to the RAF. The RAF then starts practicing with them, and the pilots absolutely love them. The only problem is they're a little bit hard to take off and land, which makes sense because they're basically a paper airplane with a fucking V8 attached to them.
So, as I recall, the British government didn't order, they were promised 50 of them as kind of an incentive to, hey, give us a chance. And so, another interesting fact about the Mosquito is that they were made with wood laminate, and the glue that was used to put them together was essentially a fish-based glue. Also, the fact that they didn't have rivets and bumps in the skin made them even more aerodynamic, so that gave them speed as well. There was an oral history interview that was done sometime after the war with one of the test pilots for the British Air Force who tested the original Mosquito, and he said it was a lot of fun. They tested it against the Spitfire, and he said at any altitude, the Mosquito outperformed the Spitfire. So that was really exciting. And the first Mosquitoes to actually roll off the assembly line were for dropping bombs, and so they had a little bit of a bigger belly.
Decision gets made that only the best pilots are going to be allowed to fly these things, and now we got to find what the first mission for the Mosquito is going to be, and it's going to be super secret because nobody knows that this plane even exists yet. So up until this point in the war, the British really didn't have a surveillance plane capable of flying over enemy territory and seeing what they were up to, so they were actually using their fighters, the Spitfire, to do that. And while the Spitfire is awesome, it sucked for this particular job because it simply couldn't hold enough fuel to go very far into enemy territory. The Mosquito, on the other hand...
And speaking of fuel, with additional fuel tanks, the Mosquito could fly anywhere from 6.5 to 7 hours round trip, which you can go quite far in Europe with that amount of fuel and time.
Instead of filling it with bombs, we're just going to fill it with an extra gas tank, and this thing is going to be able to fly from England all the way to the Soviet Union and back in one flight without refueling, and that's exactly what it does. Yeah, the Mosquito is, for all intents and purposes, the world's first long-range reconnaissance aircraft that set the groundwork for every aircraft after it. It's basically the acoustic SR-71. So that's what they use it for the rest of...
And that's a good point. I've thought the same thing myself. It's like an early version of the SR-71, which itself doesn't have defensive armaments. It's just meant to fly faster than anything that's shot after it.
1941, 1942 rolls around, they're like, oh, hey, good idea. This thing can hold 4,000 pounds worth of ordnance. What if we just did one 500-pound bomb and some extra fuel tanks, and then we could bomb super deep into enemy territory? And that's exactly what they're going to do. Operation Jericho, a bunch of wooden wonders are going to low-level penetrate deep into enemy territory and deliver a payload. Try saying that with a straight face. So a bunch of Mosquitoes take off to Norway. They are going to bomb Gestapo headquarters with 500-pound bombs. They fly all the way there above the ground and or ocean at like 100 feet, make it there more or less completely undetected, and bomb Gestapo headquarters. The only problem was, because they were so low to the ground, they decided that they were going to extend the fuse time on the bombs because they don't detonate on impact, they detonate on a timer. So they extended the timer to 11 seconds to allow the planes to get out of the blast radius of the bomb. So they went ahead and they dropped the bombs. The bombs were a direct hit on the Gestapo building. The only problem was the fuse was a little bit too long, and a 500-pound bomb traveling at like 400 miles an hour apparently has enough force in it to go through one wall, through the building, and out the other wall, and all 4 of the bombs did exactly that, flying completely through the building before detonating. So the mission failed successfully. Did they accomplish their goal? Not
Good
really,
point. Good
but
way to
they
put
did
it.
prove that the Mosquitoes were pretty much unstoppable and very accurate. So now they're going to begin using the Mosquitoes to nuisance bomb Germany. Every night, they're going to begin sending out swarms of Mosquitoes to bomb Germany on their own home turf to begin weakening their morale. And with the Mosquitoes, this works for some reason way better than any other plane was ever able to do it. Like, the Mosquitoes rarely ever get caught when they're dropping bombs. So they're kind of like, okay, well, let's try a bigger bomb then. And the RAF starts using the Mosquito to drop the 4,000-pound blockbuster bomb on Berlin. They then proceeded to do that every single night for 220 nights straight, earning it the nickname the Berlin Express. And then somebody at the RAF finally puts together the fact that maybe the Mosquitoes are so successful at not getting caught on their bombing runs, not necessarily because it's nighttime and not necessarily because they're really fast, but because they're made out of wood, and wood doesn't give off nearly as strong of a radar signature as metal does, which means it stands to reason that they
Well, and the fact that it was less sensitive to radar than metal aircraft was known from the beginning. This was not some new revelation that happened after a long series of successful Mosquito missions. The pilots knew that. So between the low radar profile and the speed, this gave RAF pilots a huge amount of confidence when flying it. But this level of confidence it didn't last super long. The Germans put up the Focke-Wulf 190, and that could actually take down Mosquitoes at mid-range altitude. In fact, there was another oral history interview with a Mosquito pilot. He said, "Look, if the 190 caught you at like middling altitude, you were pretty well for it. You know, getting caught by 190 was not inevitable, but there was a point at which you could just get wiped out by a 190."
would have just as much success bombing during the day as they would at night, which, if successful, is going to be extra demoralizing because at this point in time, everybody understands that there's never bombing raids during the daylight because the fighter jets would be able to take them out immediately. But in the case of the Mosquito, if they don't get picked up on radar, nobody might scramble the fighter jets until it's too late. So the RAF, with their immaculate sense of British humor, realize that this is a very rare opportunity to troll the enemy that they cannot afford to waste. So British intelligence finds out that January 30th, 1943, the Nazis are going to be holding a humongous rally to celebrate their 10-year anniversary of coming to power. It's going to be huge. Hitler's right-hand man, Hermann Göring, is going to be there giving a big speech. They're going to put the entire thing out on the radio waves so the whole country can hear it. It's going to be a huge morale boost to the Nazis. And it probably was, right up until the RAF sent out the Mosquitoes and bombed all of the broadcasting towers for Berlin, so the entire country just got to hear explosions, screams, and then the radio cut out forever. And then the British turned it.
And there's more of a symbolic victory there too. Hermann Göring was the head of the German Luftwaffe. So by having the British RAF take out his speech, that's a pretty undeniable claim on who is the better air force here.
Into an entire propaganda thing, because not only are we hitting you on your own home turf in broad daylight, it's also in a wooden plane. So the Nazis are absolutely furious. They want to retaliate, so they ramp up air raids on Britain. The only problem is they can't really pull them off in daylight, but it is 1943, so they have figured out how to put radar in their individual fighter planes, meaning that the night raids are going to be far more successful than they ever were before. Or so they thought, because guess what? The British have a plane that's pretty much immune to radar. So they take the Mosquito bomber and they turn it into the bomber fighter by putting 4 20mm machine guns in the nose, plus another 4 Browning machine guns in the nose, and then send them out as night fighters, and they proceed to absolutely wreck the Luftwaffe in night combat.
So I think, again, if I remember correctly, the idea of installing guns in the nose of the Mosquito was actually de Havilland's own idea. And first they put in Browning 303 caliber, which just really isn't super powerful. They're not the best. They're less than a 50 caliber. But then the addition of those 20mm cannons really turned it into a serious fighting machine, as he's talking about here.
Because they can't be seen by radar, and they have radar to see them. Then, after seeing how incredibly good the Mosquito was at night fighting, the RAF had another brilliant idea. What if they sent out a bunch of Mosquito night fighters to wait above German airfields, and then sent out regular bombing raids with regular bombers, and when those bombers got picked up on radar, they would scramble the German fighters to go up and intercept them, but the Mosquitoes would already be above them and literally spawn kill the Germans the second they got in the air. Not only did this work, it virtually shut down the Luftwaffe's ability to operate at night altogether, and the British were able to bomb Germany completely unopposed. At this point, Hermann Göring is sitting in his office like,
What? Okay, fine, I'm cool, I'm fine.
Okay, and you have to remember, Hermann Göring in World War I was a fighter pilot. He scored 7 kills in World War I, making him an ace. So like the whole aerial combat thing is like his ballpark. So the fact that the RAF is having a warheads on foreheads extravaganza and there's nothing he can do about it is driving him absolutely insane. And then you sprinkle on top the fact that he's over there with his superior German engineering and the RAF is just dunking on him and his men in what amounts to a Pinewood Derby plane. This man is about to lose his mind. So he creates a special division of the Luftwaffe whose sole purpose is to find and destroy the Mosquitoes. Okay, they're already struggling in the war, and this man has now just cut out an entire section of his Air Force to do nothing but hunt down these wooden planes and try to destroy them. Needless to say, it fails miserably. So at this point, Hermann Göring's like, well, if I can't beat him, I've got to join him. So he orders his men to build him a wooden plane. And they straight up copy the Mosquito. Like, so much so that they also call it the Mosquito, but they just spell it with a K. Like, straight up, yeah, you can copy my homework, but make it look a little bit different. That's what they did. So they get the Mosquito with a K built, and to the surprise of absolutely nobody, it's a pretty awesome plane. But then guess what happens to it? You're never gonna guess what happens to the German Mosquito. A bunch of high-ranking Nazis, politicians, get together and they're like, I don't think a wooden plane's a good idea. I want big metal planes with metal armor and a bunch of machine guns all over them because that's the way to go. The same political BS that shut down the British Mosquito 10 years prior is now holding up the Nazis. So much so that they don't even get their first test flight in until June of 1944, which is way too late in the war for the Nazis to begin making a new type of plane and mass producing it. So that's it. The Germans never really got their version of the Mosquito. They ended up
So the German Mosquito actually had its first test flight in summer of 1943 and did go into a limited production. The factory at which these were made was in Wuppertal in Germany, and that's the city that has the unique hanging tram. It's pretty cool to see. But the factory there was also destroyed by Allied bombing, so it really never got off the ground. Yes, there was infighting in the German Luftwaffe circles. Heinkel himself was not super enthused about the German Mosquito. The German Mosquito is also plagued by problems. As war material became really scarce, they didn't have the proper glue to laminate the wooden Mosquito, so they tried a different one, which ended up being corrosive and harming the metal that was in there. They also had problems with the plane delaminating and just kind of falling apart around them. So the Mosquito had a little bit of a chance, but really not much of a chance, and certainly didn't have any serious impact in the air war in Europe.
losing World War II, everybody lived happily ever after. So I guess while it was dipshit politicians with teeny hands that prevented the British from getting the Mosquito on time, it was also dipshit politicians that prevented the Nazis from getting the Mosquito on time. So everything kind of equals out in a weird roundabout kind of way. In conclusion, the de Havilland Mosquito at a glance might appear to be this one-off weird thing that happened one time during World War II, but in reality it is probably the single most important and influential aircraft in aviation history. You see, all planes today are not built with the ideology that they need to have armor and machine guns in order to take a hit and return fire, or at least most of them aren't. They would pretty much all much rather be so fast that they can't be caught, or so sneaky that they never get seen. And that entire strategy was pioneered by a wooden plane in World War II known as a de Havilland Mosquito. Thank you for watching. Best way to support the channel is go buy some merch over at the Fat Electrician.
So yeah, the Brits continued to manufacture the Mosquito up until right about 1950. And then afterwards, they, right about the 1960s, they started using them for target practice. And so there's not a ton of Mosquitoes left, but that was a good video. Lots of good basic information. I hope I was able to provide a little bit more information and make it fun. Though, gotta say, the Fat Electrician, like I say, he's a good storyteller. So I'd like to thank you for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.